Good evening, and welcome to the Voice of Many podcast show. Our guest today is a conscientious doula. She helps people to understand and connect to their energetic frequencies and make them aware. Um, she is actually Miss Lynnda and
Pollio.
Pollio, and she is going to enlighten us on what a conscientious doula is. But also, she has written a very well um, book called Trusting the Currents, which also um, flows into what she actually does and what she's actually able to bring to light in each and every one of us. So, without further ado, welcome, Lynnda. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here. Like I said before we went on, I'm so happy to be interviewed by a mother and daughter. I think it's such a powerful way to do a podcast and to get your own messages out in the world too.
Oh, thank you. So, if you will, for us and our listeners and those that are viewing, can you tell us a little bit what is a conscientious doula and how it affects us?
Well, consciousness doulas have been around for a long time. The whole idea of a doula is something that births something. So birthing doulas have been around. They're kind of like midwives, and they really help mothers give birth to babies. And a few years ago, the idea of a death doula took hold, and it's helping people that are going through the death process go through it with more dignity, help the family understand what is the process that is happening, and help the person who is passing move into that next world with a little bit more love and sense of security and a sense of understanding and being more conscious about the death process. And for me, I've been involved in consciousness, I think probably since I was born. I was always kind of the odd child that kind of knew things and spent time speaking to insects in the woods. And so the idea of consciousness was always sort of part of me. I didn't know the word, but it was always something that I was connected to. And I was in advertising for several years. And then I took care of my father for a year before he passed. And after he passed, I heard a voice say, go to Sedona, which is where I live now, Sedona, Arizona. But at the time I was living in New York, where I spent most of my adult life. And I got on a plane. I had nowhere to stay, didn't know where I was going, and came to Sedona and had a lot of mystical experiences that sort of reawakened in me the spirituality and the sense of sort of inner depth that I'd had as a child. And when I came back to New York, I just could not go back to my mainstream corporate world. I really wanted to start making a difference in the world. It had opened me up to the fact that I wanted my presence on the planet to mean something, not only to myself, but to the people around me. So I started bringing the idea of consciousness into business first. I got involved in conscious business practices, and that involved at the time companies that were becoming organic, solar power, all these kind of new ways of looking at life, to make your body healthier, your mind healthier, your spirit healthier. And I became the world's first chief consciousness officer for a large global marketing company. And what I did with them was I took what I call the human technologies of wisdom, intuition, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, and gratitude. And I started working with the senior executives of large companies to bring these ideas into their companies so that they could sort of help and support their consumers and their employees and business partners, because I felt that it was time that business kind of got a little bit warmer and a little bit more caring about their employees and their consumers. So I did that for a while. And then I my mother got very ill, and I was caught up in 9 years of 24/7 care. So anyone who's been a caregiver knows what that does to you. So I went very much into a dark night of the soul. And during that period of time, I really learned a lot about myself. I think when you go through really hard times, it pushes you deeper into yourself. I mean, we tend to try to scramble to get out of that feeling. Yeah. But what I learned, because I was locked in it for so many years, that it was almost like I had to stop scrambling. And I just surrendered to the experience of being stuck in a place that I didn't want to be. And I found that when I went deeper into my suffering, I started having other experiences. I started finding parts of my soul that I didn't know I had. And that kind of expanded my awareness and expanded my consciousness. And it changed my belief systems. It changed my belief systems about the person I was going to be. It changed my belief systems about my environment and the people around me. So during that period of time was when I was writing Trusting the Currents, which sort of came to me suddenly. I started hearing the voice of a Southern Black woman just started speaking to me. And she asked me to tell her story. And over a 2-year period, I channeled her story. It took me another 8 years to edit it, but that's for later on. But during that period of time, Addie Mae became an incredible influence. And I don't think I have a person in my life that has meant more to me than Addie Mae, the narrator of the book. And it really helped me move into a new level of consciousness myself, by accepting some of the trauma, by recognizing the things that were inside of me from my own childhood and from my ancestry. You know, we all come from ancestry that has had trauma, and we inherit those, whether we're conscious of it or not. It's actually better if we're conscious of our inherited struggles, because then we can work with them. It's when we don't remember or we don't know that we're reacting out of our own trauma that we have the most problems. So I started working more with consciousness for myself. So I became my first sort of customer in trying to understand what was going on in my life and try to manage the struggle that I was having and come through it having meaning. Because I think if you're going through a really tough time, it always ends. All suffering ends in freedom. And whether it is suffering that you're dying, you still die into a sense of freedom, whatever that world is beyond us, whatever your belief systems are. But suffering always ends. And so when you become more conscious of the experience of suffering, you're able to navigate it way differently than you would without it. So I started navigating it differently. So by the time my mother passed, I was really much more aware of myself. And so Consciousness Doula, what I do is I help other people birth their own consciousness. And it really is about helping understand why you're reacting to things the way you're reacting to, and how can you go inside yourself to find the gifts that are inside of you, because all of us have gifts. And, you know, our cultures, our governments, even our religions and our environments, our family environments, they kind of squash us, because it's way easier to control people when they're told they don't have value and told they have to act a certain way or they don't have value. But really our most happiest times come from when we follow our heart, and our heart holds all of our codes for our happiness. We just that because most of us come from some sort of trauma in our backgrounds, it's also where we store most of our trauma. So as we move into our heart, we very often get afraid, and we don't want to go there because we don't want to face the trauma that's in there. So, you know, the idea of whether it's a consciousness doula or just you become more aware and conscious yourself. I mean, really what a conscious doula does is help you manage your own consciousness. It's not about really guiding you yourself. It's about giving you the courage to know that you have all the abilities yourself to do this, and that there's nothing weird about it, that you will feel very vulnerable when you start this process. And people think that vulnerability is a weakness. It's actually a superpower. When we're vulnerable by ourselves, we feel very weak. When we share our vulnerability with other people, it's the beginning of strength. And that's why when we have friends, sometimes it's not even our friends that help us. Sometimes it's strangers. Sometimes it's people we meet that we don't know. Sometimes it's people we barely know. Very often when you start becoming more conscious and you start asking questions around yourself, like you start questioning your life. You start questioning the rules around your life. You start questioning your role in life. And why do I have to be in this role? Why can't I be over there? The people around you are the least have the least ability to help you break out, because they don't want you to break out. Because if you break out, then you are leaving them behind. So very often you have to kind of skip over the people that are holding you in the place that you're currently existing in, and you have to reach out. And whether it's a book, whether it's a workshop, whether it's people in a different town, people in your same town that you don't know. I always tell people, if you're stuck in a place that you don't like in your life, you have to change your life. And that doesn't mean you have to change everything. It can mean something as simple as change the daily habits. If you go to work one day, go to work another way the next day. Just change your daily routine, because our daily routines very often hold our bigger habits in place. And sometimes our bigger habits are a little overwhelming to try to change, but you can change the little things in your life. And when you change the little things in your life, you very often start pulling away the scaffolding that is holding the bigger problems in place. So a consciousness doula, or anyone who is helping you awaken into a new world, really just helps you to discover yourself.
Very true. Very true.
So how do you go from, I know you've done it with business and yourself, but how do you change your thinking from head to heart, and how does that affect your energy frequencies as well?
Well, we're all in our head. Most people are in their head, and the head's where all their fear is. So if you're afraid, you're in your head. Your heart is never afraid. Your heart knows you are perfect all the time. Your heart knows that you cannot make a bad decision, because every decision you make, bad or good, is teaching you something or leading you somewhere. And we're very fragile human beings, just trekking through this life as best we can. And the heart wants us to be as happy as we can, but it also wants us to learn as much as we can in this lifetime, so that wherever we go the next time, we don't have to regurgitate the lessons that we have in this life. So when we move from our head to our heart, the head is a magical being for allowing us to make the practical decisions in life. I need to get somewhere. I need to go right or left. Our head does that. I need to do my taxes. Your head does that. But if you really want to make a major decision in your life, or you really want to look at who you are, you need to move into your heart, because your heart is the place that you hold everything that you truly are. You hold the information of your life in your head. You hold your experiences in your head, but you hold who you are in your heart. So the more time you can spend in there, and that requires you to sort of take chances, like I said, be comfortable with being vulnerable, be comfortable with making mistakes. I mean, we live in a very judgmental, shame-filled world right now, where we're not allowed to make mistakes, and we're not allowed to be wrong, or we get attacked. But the only way you really grow is through making mistakes. And so, it's about you being willing to fail, being willing to not be right, being willing to keep trying, and surround yourself with people that will allow that. You and your mother have this amazing relationship, and I'm sure she allows you to fall on your face and doesn't judge you for it, but the rest of the world might. So having those people around you, even if it's one, we don't have usually more than one or two people that truly will support us, regardless of everything. We live in, like I said, we're very judgmental, because we're also fearful, and we're also broken, and we all want to be right. And we feel that the only way we can be right if someone else is wrong. And we forget that we all can be right, because we live in different worlds. You live in a world, in a life that I don't live in. I live in a world, in a life that you don't live in. I come from a different background you come from. So what is right for me may not be right for you. And it's not me to judge whether you're right or not. It may be perfectly fine for your life. And what I do may be perfectly fine for my life. And I may believe in something now that I'm wrong, but I have to come to that decision myself. And it's much better if you allow me to be wrong and come to that decision down the line that then you attack me and tell me I'm wrong, because then I'm just going to defend my point of view regardless. And it doesn't allow us to sort of open up and be more understanding of each other. And the idea of frequencies, we're all energy. I mean, from the physics of life, we're all energy, and we're all made up of frequencies. Everything's a frequency. Colors are frequencies, sounds are frequencies. A chair is full of frequencies, but human beings are full of frequencies. And higher frequencies make us happy and make us more conscious and connect us to people in more loving ways. And lower frequencies are where our fears are, and they tend to bring us into bad relationships, and what'll happen is, I always tell people, look around your life. If you don't like who your friends are, you don't need to change your friends, you need to change yourself. Because once you change yourself, those people will peel away, because you will no longer be validating who they are. And you will find other people. When I first came to Sedona the first time, and I had all these mystical experiences, and I went back to New York, I ended a lot of relationships that I thought were unhealthy, that I didn't know were unhealthy. But once I became more aware of who I truly was and what I wanted for my life, I wanted to be around people who were supportive. I wanted to be around people who were loving. I wanted to be around people who were not judging other people all the time. I wanted to feel positive about life. So I had to end relationships, and I was alone for a while. And I remember my husband saying, you don't have any friends. I said, well, I'm going to wait until new ones come. And they did. And they were more aligned with the person that I was becoming, and the person that I wanted to become.
Well, this is great for those of us that are adults. How, as parents and grandparents, how do we help our little ones to be able to overcome whenever they're in school, and someone, it can be another child, it can be a teacher, and they could just overhear other teachers or other parents talking and feel as if they're talking about them. How do we take all of this energy, the direction, and be able to help our kids to be able to overcome and direct them into the right structure that they need to go into when these circumstances happen?
I think probably the number one thing is be available to listen without judging. Because I think a lot of times children are afraid to go to their parents and go to their grandparents because they're afraid they won't be heard. They're afraid of worrying their parents. They're afraid of not being understood, and being judged. And I think it's really important that, there is someone within the family structure who will allow a child to be wrong, allow a child to express how they feel without judging that or telling them the way they should be feeling or what they should be doing. Sometimes when someone's going through a bad time, particularly when they're kids, all we really need to do is hold the space of love for them and allow them to express themselves, and then help guide them. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to help. And whether that guidance comes in the form of a parent with a child or someone who has been on a more conscious path for a longer period of time, helping someone who is beginning to wake up and question everything around them, it's always the responsibility of the more conscious adult in the room to help guide that child. And I think, the idea of just giving them a safe space to vent is really important, knowing that you're always available to them. And it's so hard now because we're going through so much in the world, and parents are afraid themselves. And parents are going through a lot themselves. So, they're traumatized. And, I remember when I was a little kid, I remember the first time that I realized that my parents didn't know everything. I don't remember what the situation was, but I remember going, I must have been like 6 or 7 or something, but I remember going, I'm not safe. These people don't know what they're doing. I thought that they were going to keep me safe, but they're wrong about that. So, I'm in trouble. So that began the beginning of me trying to manage my family, because I needed to take care of them, because I realized that they couldn't take care of myself. And I think a lot of little kids do that for their parents, and their parents don't recognize that, it's good to have an exchange, and it's good for a child to kind of learn, depending on their age, to take responsibility. But it's really important that kids know that they're safe, and that their parents are going to be okay. And if they're not going to be okay, that they have a conversation around it.
Yeah. And then too, it's so important, like you say, for the parent and the grandparent to give that structure, that comfort, that opening for the kids. It's also important to realize that, like you say, with everything that's going on, we as parents sometimes don't understand and don't know how to accept what's going on. And then when our kids leave us to go to school, and the teachers, they have their own situations at home that they're dealing with.
Everyone is right now.
Right. And so it's not just the personal life, it can be the school life, it can be what's going on in current events that is overflowing into the classrooms. So it's important that we that are influencers to children, that we remember that their little ears are hearing everything, their heads is absorbing everything, and that their hearts are consuming everything that's taking place. So, and everything that's happening is influencing that child and impacting that child. And they never forget, because it's molding them.
Yeah, I mean, think about your life as a child. I mean, I look at my life as a child. I told you earlier, my father was an alcoholic, so that really imprinted on me as a child and created these. And what happens when we get traumatized as children, we're very often don't have memory of the real trauma, so it begins to act out in us in ways that we're not aware of, and that's when people get mean, they get judgmental. It's only, happy people and mean, like happiness and mean people don't go together. If someone's mean, they're not happy. Those two things cannot exist together. So anyone who's mean has had trauma in their lives. Anyone who is being, cruel towards someone else, judgmental, jealous, whatever that is, it's because they're traumatized. So, how can you help them? How can you help the parent? I mean, and again, it's all about communicating our vulnerabilities and not judging each other. Finding the people in your community and in your family and in your friendships that you can have a conversation with, and then help each other with your kids. I mean, we're really coming into a time where community is really important. And turn off the television, particularly like try to get your kids away, go out in nature, play ball with them, like sit under a tree. It's so important that we don't get caught up in external world that we have no control over, but I always say, clean up your own little acre of earth and the world would be fine. If everyone would just worry about how can I be a better person? How can I help the people in my world be better people and be happier? The whole world would get better, but we don't want to work on ourselves. We want to tell everybody else to change their lives and get to be better. And it really is an inside job. And I think once we realize that, and once we find the people in our lives that allow us to be wrong and allow us to fail and allow us our vulnerabilities, and help us in figuring out how to get better. And these are not, there's no fast, easy way, because trauma is deep.
Yeah.
And it really needs to be dealt with in a way with great love. And that's also, a place of the heart. And there's a lot of other, you can go through therapy. There's a lot of traditional ways of doing it. But for me, the idea of going deep into your own consciousness and allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable, it's going to feel uncomfortable. But once you allow that uncomfortable feeling to pass, you will have a whole new outlook about who you are and the person that you're going to become in the world.
Go ahead, but anything. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for the listeners and watchers, if you don't mind, share a little bit about your book, Turning the Currents, and where can they get it?
Okay, well, Trusting the Currents, and it's actually a book about, it's all about trusting the currents in life, no matter what has happened to you and no matter what struggles you've gone through, but to really get to know yourself enough that you learn to trust where life is taking you, even if it's taking you to places that you don't want to be. And I had no intention of writing a book. I was not a writer. And I was working on a project. I was living in New York, working on a business project. And I all of a sudden heard an old Black Southern woman. And her first words to me were, "It's not what happened to me that matters." And it was scary and it was weird. And I just wrote down the sentence, and then I heard her again, and I wrote 2 or 3 paragraphs, and I went, okay, that's kind of weird. 2 or 3 days later, I started writing again, and it took about, it's a long story, I won't go into it, but it took about 2 years of her telling me her story. And she introduced me to her family, and Mama and Jenny were loved too. It's a book of really strong women characters. All the characters are African American except for one, Mr. Orchard, one not so nice white guy. But it's very strong women characters, and it's a book ultimately about love. It's about primarily about self-love and family love and romantic love. But the book, it took me 10 years to finish writing because I just kept saying, this is crazy. I'm this middle-aged white woman from New York writing about a Southern girl from the South, a Black girl from the South. No one's going to believe me. No one's going to listen. And Addie Mae was actually named after Addie Mae Collins, who was one of the little girls that was murdered in the Birmingham church bombings in 1963. And while I was writing the book the first year, I couldn't get her name. She would not give me her first name, and I kept changing the name. And then it was the anniversary of the Birmingham church bombings that killed the 4 little girls, and they had the pictures of the 4 little girls on the television. And as soon as I saw Addie Mae Collins, I was like, that's her. Like, that was her name. So I cut out a picture from the paper. I know. I cut out a picture from the paper, and for the rest of the time I wrote the book, I had a photograph of Addie Mae Collins taped to my computer, and I wrote to her. And it was just an amazing time, and I really felt a very, very strong connection to her in particular. And I felt like I was in some weird way giving her a life she never had. And Addie Mae Aubrey, who's the narrator of the book, is an amazing woman. And she's all about, she doesn't start off being very conscious. She's just your typical young girl who's trying to make her way through and figure she's going to get married and make babies in the same town that her mother did, and her mother did, and her mother did. And through a very spiritual, wise cousin and a incredible teacher who gives her a bunch of books. The 2 things that really transform Addie Mae is reading. So knowledge becomes really important to her, and it really gives her a sense of life outside her small town, that she's expected to just live like everybody else in her town. And then a rising sort of spirituality that really comes from nature and from her cousin Jenny's connection to nature. So these 2 things, she starts evolving into a new person and makes different decisions about her life because of that. So the book, I self-published the book because I figured who was going to publish this book? It was so bizarre. And since then, it's won 13 literary awards, and it was an Amazon bestseller in inspirational fiction. It's done really well. It has incredible reviews, and it really seems to touch people where they are. Addie Mae, as Addie Mae tells you her story, she brings you into your own story. And there's 3 levels to the book. There's the story, which is really the coming of age story of a young Southern Black girl in the rural South in the late 1930s. There are spiritual messages woven through the book that anyone can relate to, regardless of age, race, religion, culture. And then there's an energetic frequency embedded in the writing that brings you into your heart as you're reading the book. And many people can feel the energy of Addie Mae and the things that she's trying to help the readers of the book kind of understand about themselves. And again, it's the book about helping you understand yourself better so that you can make better decisions for yourself. So it's been quite a journey for me, and I am forever grateful for Addie Mae. She's been the most influential person in my life, and I never really met her, you know, but she's been as real to me as anyone else. And you can get the book on Amazon and some of the other platforms, iTunes and BarnesandNoble.com. And yeah, and I have a website, LyndaPollio.com. I'm on social media and all that, but yeah, I highly recommend it. I love Addie Mae. She's giving me a perspective about the world and about myself that I never would have had. And I love when people get the same thing out of her.
Yeah. I have to say, like I told you, whenever she describes her mom,
yeah,
that was me seeing the generations before me.
Yes.
The way my mom brought me up, the way my grandmother was, and the way my great grandmother was. I could really relate to that. And then, like I say, the wedding, everything building up to the wedding, the way she poured her heart out. She always opened her door. She always had a table. She always had something willing to give to everyone.
She was the heart of the book. She showed you that you are never wrong if you make decisions from your heart.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't work out the way you want it to be, like you give your heart to someone and they break your heart, you still did the right thing. You just have to learn now to give your heart. I mean, that should be like a lesson. Then you go, okay, what is it about that person? I mean, I have my favorite quote in my life is a quote from Maya Angelou. And she said, when someone shows you themselves, believe them.
Yeah.
That when you meet someone, you pretty much know who they are, but because you have expectations of them that you want them to be, you will ignore that little voice inside of you, and you will try to have some kind of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or friendship, and then it turns south, and then you act surprised, but they always showed you who you were. I mean, who they were. So I'm a big believer in there are no mistakes. They're all just lessons that lead you to the evolution of your consciousness, because the more you learn and the more you're willing to learn, sometimes we think we're learning, but we're afraid to learn. So we cut it down. We don't want to look at it. But once we look at it and we are willing to say we made a mistake, and you look at why you made a mistake, then you evolve and your consciousness expands, and you'll never do that again.
And I have to tell anyone that's listening, please get trusting the currents, because it really allows you to reflect.
Yes.
And like you say, it pulls you in
brings
and
you into yourself.
yes, yes.
If you allow it, you have to allow the book to, because a lot of people that if they have a closed heart, if they've gone through a lot of trauma, sometimes they have a hard time reading the book, because when they start feeling emotion, it scares them.
They'll put it down.
They'll put it down. So I always encourage, even if you're going to cry, even if it's going to bring up something about your past that you don't want to look at, allow yourself to have the experience, because Addie Mae is guiding you to a better place for you. She's an amazing teacher.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'm so happy that you invited me to do this. It was really wonderful.
Oh, it's
a pleasure.
It's been good. It's really been good. The book put it all together. It really did. It really did.
I want to say thank you one more time for joining us and being with us.
Thank you, Vanessa.
It really has been a great time having you. And to our watchers and listeners, please don't forget to check out our social media web pages. And also, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, as we don't want you to miss out on our great guests and our wonderful topics. And we want to thank you all for tuning in.